Hello, wonderful people. I had a really interesting experience recently with my father. I thought I'd sit down and share it all because it's kind of a little bit of a head trip, a little bit unexpected. So, for full context, I have not always had the best relationship with my father. I have talked about this in my depression article. There's an entire chapter at the start of it, the chapter called Despair, where I talk about how my father was never really there for me. I also covered it in my prison video. So I talked about the time I went to prison when I was like, 19, 20, 21, sometime around there. I think I was like 21. I talked about that in a two-part series. But basically, my father and I never really had a very good relationship. He was there, but not really there. It always felt like he was just this almost ghost in my life who would sit there in the room but never really respond to me. And I can remember being a young boy and coming home, like 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, and saying, "Hey, dad, like, hi, daddy, here's what I did today at school." And he would kind of just not listen. He would be staring at the TV or he would be doing something else, and he would kind of just not really even acknowledge me. The best I would ever hope for is like a grunt, like, and, being a young boy, I very much wanted daddy's approval. And I would try really hard to get his approval and, you know, share stories of what I did at school. I would share my marks. And I often felt like my scores were never really good enough. Nothing I did was ever really good enough. It was again like he just wasn't even there. It's not like he ever criticized me or said, "You're not good enough. You need to try harder." It was one step worse than that. It was at least, in my mind, a complete and utter ignoring of me as a human being. And he did somewhat similar to my sister, so I never took it. That's not true. I took it very personally at the time, but with age, I was able to see, okay, it's not about me. It's not that I'm not good enough because he's doing the same with my sister and to some degree with my mother. Maybe he's just an unhappy person. Maybe he's just depressed. And as the years went by, and I went through my own depression, and then I went through prison, and then I ended up becoming, optimistic. And you hear me saying this at the start of most of my videos. I went from depressed and suicidal to living a life of abundance and joy. If I can do it, you sure as hell can too. That little speech. As I healed my own depression and worked on my own self improvement and my own self love, and then giving that love to other people, I came to see my dad is just depressed, and he's probably been depressed his entire life. And I have some theories as to why, but talking to him only ever brought up defensiveness or sometimes anger, like he would get angry. And my mother tried many, many, many times. She got him to go to a counselor one time, like a therapist. And he left that session and came back home and said, "Therapy doesn't work. It's stupid. I'm never doing that ever again." Despite the fact that his son was able to go through depression and prison and all of that. And therapy helped me immensely, obviously. Therapy is just self improvement, you know? And so watching him battle his own depression, I guess, and then seeing myself come out of my own depression, I healed my depression, I would say, by about 21, 22. And then I've spent the last 15 years, I'm 37 now. I've spent the last 15 or so years building that beautiful life of abundance and joy, figuring out how to be grateful, figuring out how to be happy. It was very interesting watching myself go down that pathway or living that pathway, and then seeing him go down a different pathway where he just stagnates and becomes more and more depressed, more unhappy. He had cancer at one point, and I almost didn't think he was going to heal the cancer. It seemed like he was just ready to die. And watching him become an alcoholic, watching him gain weight, and then watching my mother sort of not give up on him, because she never really did, but watching her build her own independence and say, okay, if my husband is going to be depressed, I'm not going to fall down into the abyss with him. I'm going to build my own life, and I will love him. I will support him. I'll be with him. Like, they're still together, but I'm going to spend time with my friends. I'm not going to sit around at home while he's sad. I'm going to build my own life, and I'm going to invite him on trips and road trips and all of that. And sometimes he would say yes, sometimes he would say no. But my mother very much took an active, independent role and decided to put her happiness and her self love first, which I really respect and admire her for doing. And I've had lots of conversations with her over the years. You know, my mum and I talk probably once every week, maybe once every 2 weeks, and we'll have long, like 2 or 3 hour long conversations about self improvement, about independence, about love, about all that kind of stuff. And it was very challenging for her to sort of step aside a little bit and say, okay, my husband, as much as I love him, as much as I adore him, he's depressed. And he doesn't seem to want to come out of that. He doesn't seem to want to do anything about it. And I think she and I, and maybe my sister, had to some degree resigned to the fact that my dad was probably going to die depressed. You know, he was probably just never going to deal with it. He was never going to have a close relationship with me. He was never going to acknowledge the fact that he was depressed. He was never going to talk about the fact that I went to prison. He basically never really talked to me about it. He visited me a couple of times in prison, but he's held on to that for a long time because I think, or now I know, and I'll get to this in a second, but he blamed himself. And even though I went through prison, and I talked about this in the videos, again, you can just search on my channel for the word prison. I did, these 2 videos here talking about it. Prison was the most beautiful gift that I ever could have received. It was a wake-up call. It was an acknowledgement of like, you've made a mistake. You've done something that could potentially harm other people. You need to go and sit aside in prison for 6 months. I went to prison for 6 months. You need to sit in there and you need to think about things. You need to think about karma. You need to think about how you want to treat other people. You want to think about, how the world is going to treat you if you continue down this selfish path of depression. And my depression was very selfish. And for a lot of us, our depression can be a little bit selfish. We don't mean to be, but like when you're depressed, all you can see is your own pain and your own apathy and your own nihilism. And you kind of don't care about other people. And again, that's not a criticism or a judgment. I've worked with a lot of depressed people, and depression is self-centered. Not intentionally, but it is. And so prison was the most beautiful wake-up call for me. It was a chance to meditate every day, and I would sit there for like 3 or 4 hours just in the sun with the beautiful sun baking on my face, and I would just sit there with my eyes closed, and I'd kind of just be like this, like namaste, and I'd just be sitting there thinking how to improve my life. And that was kind of the start of the self-improvement journey for me. Actually, it started when I was arrested, and then there was like a 2 year, like 18-month period from when I was arrested to when I actually went to prison, because the justice system is a little bit like backed up, I guess you would say. Like there's a lot going on. And so it took about 2 years to, get sentenced. But in those 2 years, and then definitely in the 6 months of prison, it was the most healing, beautiful, transformative thing that ever could have happened for me. It was a gift. But my father never really acknowledged that. Even though I told him 100 times, and I wrote letters to him and to my mother while I was in there, and he visited me a few times, and I would speak to him on the phone. I spoke to my mother every single day that I was in prison. I would talk to her for hours. I would write her like multiple letters a week. I wrote all of my family members' letters. A bunch of my family visited me. I was able to connect with all of them and learn these beautiful stories about all of them and learn about their childhoods and their lives and all of that. So prison was so healing for me. And I think for a lot of my family, except for my father, who again blamed himself and saw it as a bad thing. He saw prison as a bad, shameful, awful thing and was never really able to move past that or let go of that. Even 15 years later, this happened, or I did this when I was 21. So, God, that's like 16. I was in prison when I was 21. So it's like that's 16 or so years ago. That's a long time, right? That's a lifetime ago. I am further away from that than that was from my birth. In other words, it's more than double the amount of time. Almost. I guess the math doesn't work out on that, does it? Nobody check my maths, but you get the point. That was a long time ago. There's a different person, a different place in my life. Doesn't feel like that was me. It obviously was, but it was a past me. And so I've moved on. I'd moved on like fucking 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So had my mother and everybody else, but not my father. And there are a lot of regrets that he had with his like raising of me, and that he felt like he was never really there for me, which is true. He felt like he never really talked to me, which is true. He felt like we never really had a relationship, which is true. He felt like he never really told me that he loved me, which is true. I think I heard it from him like a couple of times, but only really when he was very drunk. And like had to work up the courage. And in my mind at that time as a child, I kind of hated alcohol and I hated that he had to get really drunk to tell me that he loved me. Now I can just see it with compassion and I'm like, yeah, like he had to get himself drunk to tell me that he loved me. Isn't that sweet? That he still got himself drunk just so that he could say those words that were really difficult for him. But he's held on to a lot of pain and regret and shame. I talk a lot about the map of consciousness, which is this thing I'm showing here on the screen, where at the very bottom, you have the emotions or the feelings, I guess you could say the levels of consciousness that are not particularly helpful and don't particularly make you all that happy or peaceful. Guilt and shame and apathy, apathy being like depression or nihilism. And at the very top, you have, peace, love, joy, reason, enlightenment, acceptance, like all those nice emotions that feel really good. My father sat down the very bottom for the vast majority of his life, down in shame, deep shame about who he was, shame about his inability to, in his own mind, his inability to raise happy children, even though I told him a million times I'm happy, and so did my sister. My sister is married with a kid, and she's very happy, and so am I. My mother is very happy, but my dad felt a lot of shame towards not being a good husband, even though my mother has said to him a million times, I don't need anything from you. You're exactly what I want you to be. It's okay if you're depressed. I don't blame you. I don't need anything else from you. But part of depression can be a lot of shame about who we are. And then we project that onto other people. We feel all the shame and then we assume that other people must hate us. We assume that our shame is correct or valid, even if everybody else is telling us, no, like I don't need you to feel ashamed. Like I love you. I want you to be happy. And I'd express that to my dad a lot of times, but the words never really resonated. And my mother had expressed that too, but the words never really resonated. So that's a fair bit of the backstory between my father and I. And really, I'm just talking about my father, and who he was and how he felt and all of that. And for many, many, many years, I was very angry and I carried around a lot of anger about that, a lot of frustration, a lot of daddy issues, a lot of pain of like, why can I never get my father's approval? Why can I never get my father's love? I took it very personally. I took it as a personal rejection that my dad never really wanted a relationship with me. And I think I knew he wanted a relationship with me, but he was never at the time capable of it. I took it very personally until probably age 32, maybe somewhere around there. So, like in the last 5 years. And it's only really been with a lot of my own self love, a lot of the Byron Katie, David Hawkins books that I read, a lot of things like there's a book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying that talks about love, a lot of Mother Teresa books, like all the stuff that I've been reading about self love in the last couple of years. It was then that I was able to see him through compassionate eyes. I think being a coach, me being a coach has also really helped. If you ever want to have compassion and empathy and understanding of the human condition and other people, become a fucking coach or a therapist or a mentor or something. Holy shit. Like when you coach, I probably coached like, I don't know, like 500, 1,000 people, something like that at this point. Just coaching that many people and having you guys and girls as an audience as well helps because I get to see your comments and then, do videos and content trying to help you. So, doing all of that really gives you some perspective and compassion for the human condition for sure. And so with all of that, I was able to see him with love and compassion and say, yeah, he's doing his best. I know he loves me. He's just not very efficient or capable of telling me that. I know he cares about me. I know he cares about my mother. I know he's tried his absolute best, but he's carried around his own pain and he hasn't been able to move past that and express the love and the joy and the excitement and all of that stuff. He's been too stuck down, again, this map of consciousness. He's been all the way down the bottom in shame, a little bit of guilt and apathy, but mostly shame. My dad has just mostly felt shame for most of his life, which is obviously one of the least empowering emotions. It's very hard to tell someone you love them if you're feeling ashamed of who you are. It's very hard to work on goals and all of that. And over the years, yeah, as he became more and more depressed, he stopped doing the things that used to bring him joy. I can remember all of the habits and the hobbies that he had. Like he used to be very into motorcycles and he would like pull them apart and reconstruct the engine. He used to do the same with, our car, like his car. He would take the whole fucking family car apart and he'd spend like 3 days doing it, pulling all the bits of the engine apart and all this stuff. I didn't even know what the hell he was doing. And then he'd somehow know how to put it all back together and it would work even better than it used to. And that shit used to blow my mind. But he stopped doing that as he became more depressed. He sold his motorbike and he used to make surfboards. My dad used to be a very avid surfer and surf all the time. So he stopped surfing, but he used to make surfboards too, like literally make them out of foam and then fiberglass and then paint them. Like it would take weeks, and he put so much effort and love into them. And then some of them he'd give away, some of them he'd sell. He had, he got to a point where a bunch of people would request a surfboard or a boogie board, like a body board, a smaller board, a long board. Like he made so many surfboards. He probably made like 50 of them. And they brought him so much joy, but he stopped doing that, as he became depressed. He used to love camping and going traveling with my mother, but he slowed down on that. He was still doing a little bit, but a lot less. He used to be obsessed with tennis. He used to play that with me all the time, but he just stopped doing that. All of the things that used to bring him love and happiness and joy, he stopped doing. And let's talk about maybe what changed, because recently, which is the whole point of this video, that's all the backstory, or that's 10% of the backstory. But recently, like 3 weeks ago, I got a message or I spoke to my mother on the phone, and she said, do you know your father has decided to go to a silent retreat? And if any of you aren't familiar with what that is, you basically go to like a place in the woods, or like it's like a resort almost, but like not quite as expensive. Like you go to a resort and the idea is nobody talks. Nobody's allowed to talk there. If you need to communicate something with someone, you write it down. If you absolutely have to talk, like it's a medical emergency, fine, that's fine. But the idea is nobody will really talk. And you have people that run this like retreat, and they do yoga, and they do just like, they have areas where you can go and like meditate. They have areas you can go and like purge your emotions. They do things like campfires, and you all sit around the fire and you write down your regrets on pieces of paper, and then you throw them in the fire to like help you let go of them. They ate really good food. And basically the whole point of this was to just go there and meditate and think. Maybe you've got some trauma you want to let go of. Maybe you just want to get away from your busy job and go somewhere where it's fucking quiet because no one's talking. Maybe you just want to be with your own thoughts and give yourself a little bit of a chance to think. And so anyway, my mum said, your dad has decided to go to a silent retreat. And I was like, you serious? That's amazing. That's so cool, because that is just so fucking far from my dad. My dad has spent most of his life denigrating and mocking anything to do with spirituality, anything to do with happiness or peace or love. He would make derogatory comments on my coaching sometimes. And so that just caused even more of a rift between us. He believed that therapy was a scam. And so he would sometimes even say that I am, like me, Andy, my content is a scam. And I was like, but what about all the testimonials of the hundreds of people whose lives are literally changed and the gratitude that they give me? And it's like, yeah, no, I don't believe that. That's all a scam. He was just old school and grumpy and depressed and full of shame. And when you're in that spot, it's very hard to conceive of self-improvement. You can't imagine self-improvement if you've never done it before. Anyway, so I was very surprised to hear him wanting to go to something like that, a silent retreat, because normally in the past he would mock something like that. And when I spoke to him on the phone, he was very like ashamed, funnily enough, because he's, full of shame, very ashamed about it, and would make jokes and like mock himself. And he was like, I know it's like gay, it's a stupid thing I'm doing. And I was like, no, I think it's really incredible. I think it'll be a really beautiful experience. I think it'll be amazing. And he was like, yeah, we'll see. Who knows? Ha ha ha. Like, he was trying to just defend and attack himself, I guess. But long story short, fast forward a couple of weeks, and he's 10 days into this retreat. I think he went for 2 weeks in total. And I get a phone call, and I didn't even know my dad had a phone, because his whole life he doesn't believe in phones, and he's never had a mobile phone, and he mocks them. In case you're not seeing a pattern, my dad has almost always criticized and mocked basically everything. My dad's been one of the most negative people that you'll ever meet in your entire life. And so I didn't even know he had a mobile phone. I don't know if he borrowed somebody else's mobile phone, but I get a call and I'm like, hey, it's Andy. Who's this? And he's like, it's your father. And I'm like, hey, I thought you're at the silent retreat. Aren't you not supposed to be talking right now? And he's like, I told them it's an emergency. Can I come and see you? And I kind of hesitated a little bit because I was like, well, my dad and I don't have the best relationship. We never have. I would rather, or I enjoy spending my time focusing on coaching, focusing on you guys and girls. Like, I'm busy. And not that I don't have time, I can make time. I set my own schedule and stuff like that. But I'd rather spend my time with you guys and girls. I'd rather spend my time with my audience. I'd rather spend my time with Imogen, with my coaching clients, my friends, the people that bring me a lot of love and joy. But I could hear vulnerability in his voice, maybe for the first time in decades. And so I was like, okay, sure. I'll fit you in around, like, I'll take a couple of days off and I'll fit you in around my life. And yeah. And so we planned it. He came. And from the moment he came, he seemed very different in a very interesting way. And I had all sorts of thoughts in my head of like, what he might say. And I obviously had my motto of, I have no expectations, only curiosity. So I tried my best to let go of any expectations of what he might say, positive or negative. And I just was open-minded and curious. And I had decided, I had set the intention to be very loving and unconditionally loving to him, no matter what he said, not take anything personally, not take anything as a rejection, just listen to him. The same thing that I do before every one of my coaching calls, before I sit down to do a video like this with all of you. Before any of this stuff, I will set an intention and I will almost meditate for a couple of minutes and say, I'm going to give as much love as I possibly can to you guys and girls, or I'm going to be as loving as I possibly can to this person that I'm about to do coaching with. I'm going to let go of any judgment. I'm going to empathize and put myself in their shoes and imagine what they might be feeling. And I'm going to see them as a fellow human being who's, just wanting to be loved, just wanting to be understood, just wanting to be accepted. So I set that intention before every call, before every podcast. And I did a bit of meditating, probably for an hour or two, and set that same intention with him. And so we meet up and I'm asking questions. What was it like? It was amazing. He seems really excited about it, which is surprising because that's not what I was expecting. And he talks about how cool it was to be talking to different people, not talking to different people, but like communicating with different people without talking, because you kind of have like little nods and a wink and you kind of have to indicate it stuff. And you kind of almost like you're playing charades, that game where you're trying to guess things by making hand movements and expressions. And he said it was really interesting that you would build up a preconceived notion of someone. Like you said, he would look at someone and be like, oh, that's probably an American. They're acting like an American. But because you've never heard them talk, you don't fucking know. And you don't really know their name. And so he said you would have these preconceived notions about someone, these judgments about someone, whether positive or negative, it's still a judgment. You're still like making a judgment call about them. And when he said goodbye, you're allowed to just say like a couple of words, like goodbye. It was nice to know you. You're allowed to just like whisper a couple of words. And so he talked to a lot of people and just said goodbye briefly. And he said every single person that he had an assumption about, like this person's French, this person's American, this person's probably European. He said he was wrong 100% of the time. Like the person he thought was American was actually Russian. The person he thought was British was actually French. The person he thought was French was actually like, freaking South African or something, like completely different and not even remotely close. And so I found that really fascinating. And it's a really nice reminder of how much we make judgment calls about someone that we've never really met, or maybe that we have met a few times. And we have all these preconceived notions, but we're wrong most of the time. And so the less you can assume about someone else, the closer you actually get to deeply understanding or learning about them. So I found that really interesting. He talked about the food and how amazing that was. He talked about yoga and that he did yoga. And I was like, that's really interesting. I never would have thought that you would have like enjoyed yoga, because normally you would joke about it and say, that's gay, that's stupid, that's like female shit, that's feminine shit, But he said that he very much enjoyed it. And he ended up, it's it's been a couple of weeks now. This all happened like 2 weeks ago or so. He's continued to do yoga. He's gone back home and he's still doing yoga. And I found that really fascinating because he said he hated it the first couple of days because he wasn't very good at it, but he gave himself permission to suck and slowly improved. And now he actually kind of enjoys it. He's like, it's really nice. I actually feel good after yoga. I feel like I cleansed or I healed. And he was using these words like cleansing and healing. And I was like, I did not expect my grumpy, you know, very negative father to use a word like healing or cleansed. So I found that very interesting. And he just sort of slowly opened up to me and told me all about this time at the resort and everything that he did, or the I guess it's a resort retreat. And he was telling me how beautiful it was. And I knew that he had hung on to a lot of pain and stories about me going to prison, and he had never really accepted that prison was a great experience for me. And so I kind of said to him, or I said to him, you know what's really funny, Dad? And he said, what? And I said, everything you just described about how beautiful this retreat was and how much it gave you like healing and cleansing, and you just felt really good. You got a chance to actually be alone with your thoughts and think about who you are and what you want to do. Like all the beautiful things you just got out of this, that's what prison was for me. And he kind of took some time and sat with that for a bit. And he's like, yeah, I think I know that now. I think I was just afraid to admit that. I was too scared to actually face that or think about that. And so I just told myself that you going to prison was awful for you. And I was like, I told you every day that it was beautiful. Every day that I was in there, I told you how grateful I was to be in there. It wasn't just putting on a brave face. I told you how great it was. And he's like, I know, but I just wasn't ready to hear it and to hear it. And I was like, I know, that's okay. Like you're hearing it now. And so we talked about that for a little bit. And he had kept a whole bunch of letters that I had written him and my mother. I wrote probably like 50 letters to them when I was in prison. I was writing like 2 or so letters a week, and my mother would write back. My dad never did because he, wasn't quite able to. But I wrote a lot of letters and he kept them all. And he said that he spent most of the retreat reading them and actually listening to them for the first time ever, because he said the first time he read them, it was in one ear and out the other. He didn't really remember any of it. But this time he actually listened, and he's like, yeah, my son is okay. And my son was okay when he was in prison, and he was okay every moment after that. And maybe he's okay now. And so we talked about that for a while, and I was like, yeah, I'm okay. And he opened up to me a lot. And it turns out he had written a letter himself, kind of to himself or for himself, but he read it out to me about the regrets that he had, and that he regrets that he'd never really told me that he loved me, and he regrets that he'd never really opened up. He regrets that he'd never really played, ball with me or played tennis with me much, or that he'd stopped doing the things that brought him joy. He regretted that he stopped being a part of my life. He regrets that he was negative to me. He regrets that he stopped asking how I was going and what I was up to. And he said he'd noticed the relationship that I had with my mother. I am very close with my mother, very fucking close with my mother. And he said he would always look at that and be sort of envious, but not know how to, have that same relationship. And he said quite a few really interesting things to me. Like he looked me right in the eyes and said, I know you're going to be okay. And I was like, yeah, Dad, I am. And he was like, I know you're going to be happy, even if sometimes you're not happy. And I was like, even when I'm not happy, I'm happy. Even when I'm not okay, it's okay not to be okay. And we bonded over that a little bit, and we talked about that. And he said, one of the hardest things for him as a father is being okay when you're worried that your kids aren't okay, and letting go to some extent, and realizing that your children are their own people, and that they fly away from their nest and they make their own mistakes, and sometimes they're sad, sometimes they're happy, and you can't really control that anymore. And all that you can do is just hope that you did a good job. And I said to him, you weren't perfect, but you did a good job. You and Mum taught me ethics and morality, and I know that you loved me even though you weren't able to express it. And I could see the pain that he had, and he had a lot of shame. And he said, I feel really bad about the fact that I wasn't a good father, and I feel bad that everything you've done, was in spite of the childhood that you had. And I had this big smile on my face and I felt like I could cry, tears of joy. And I was like, Dad, the fact that you weren't perfect and the fact that you weren't very good at opening up and being emotionally available. And he's like, yeah, I was never good at that. And I was like, I know. But the fact that you weren't emotionally available and that I could see the pain that caused you and I could see the gap that you and I had in our relationship because you couldn't open up to me and we couldn't have a relationship. Because of that, that is why I've spent the last 15 or 20 years working on my self-improvement. I have read thousands, maybe like hundreds of books at this, maybe thousands of books, I don't know, hundreds of books at this point on psychology, on being more emotional, on sharing my love, on being able to express love. It is literally because you couldn't express love that I made a fucking big point of saying I want to do the opposite of that. It is because you were depressed that I was like, holy shit, I want to be positive and optimistic. It is because you were not able to be there for me that I was like, I'm going to be a coach and be there for other people. I want to be there for Imogen. I want to figure out how to be there for my friends and for the people that I love because my dad wasn't able to. And I know the pain of being ignored and the pain of being, like neglected, so to speak. And so I said, you think that everything I have in my life is in spite of you. But Dad, everything I have in my life is because of you. It's not in spite of you, it's because of you. And I'm very grateful for that. And he looked like he was going to cry in that moment. He kind of just stopped and sat there for a little bit and, looked at me and was like, thank you. And I was like, yeah, Dad, like, I'm really happy. And even if I'm not happy, I'm happy with that. It's okay not to be okay, but I am okay, but it's okay if I'm not. And I said, I have a really beautiful, gratitude-filled life that I'm grateful to you and Mum for. It's only because of you two. You guys brought me life. You gave birth to me. Everything that I've ever achieved, everything that I have, everything that I've ever given to other people, any other person that I've ever helped, which at this point feels like quite a lot of people, that's only because of you. And so that really, really resonated with him. He really liked that. And I just continued to listen and we talked and sat there for a couple of hours. And the whole time it felt very interesting and surreal because I very much felt like I was there with one of my coaching clients. And when I'm with my clients, I just sit there and I have love in my heart and I just sit there going, what would be the most loving thing that I could say to this person? What would be the most helpful thing that I could say to this person? How could I genuinely change this person's life? What would be the most useful, like how could I be the most useful that I could ever be for this person right now? That's what I'm thinking like constantly when I'm sitting there coaching someone or when I'm doing these videos with you guys and girls. I'm sitting here thinking like right now, I'm literally thinking, what would be the most inspiring for them right now as I tell this story? How could I help them the most? How could I be the most vulnerable so that maybe they can, have practice being vulnerable too? How can I be the most honest with my audience so they can have some practice with being honesty too? Like I'm literally thinking, how can I give as much as I can? And that's what I was thinking in that moment with him. It was really interesting because it really genuinely felt like I was there with a coaching client. And I just sat there and smiled at him and I was just understanding and listened and all of that. And I could see the pain that he was feeling. And I said that to him several times. I said, I can see the courage that this is taking right now as he's reading his letter. And he kind of like nodded and he's like, this is really hard. And I was like, you're doing a really good job. Like, keep doing this. You're doing a really good job. And it's funny, at one point, he stopped reading and he turned to me and he said, you're really good at this. And I was like, I've had a lot of practice, but thank you. That's really nice of you. And so that felt very nice and unexpected and sweet and tender, I guess. I think most of us would agree. You don't expect to be coaching your parents. You don't expect to be sitting there feeling unconditional love while you listen to your father talk about his regrets and the pain that he went through. It was a very unique, interesting position to be sitting in, and I was very grateful for it. And I told him that afterwards, multiple times. And yeah, there's lots more I could share. There's lots more we talked about. We ended up talking for a few hours, and then we took a break, and then we went out to dinner and talked for a few more hours. And I asked him like why he'd felt so much shame and why it was so difficult to open up. And, it goes back to his childhood and the fact that he felt a lot of shame from his father because his parents were very religious and very Christian or Catholic, and had put all this pressure on him to go to church like multiple times a day. Like my grandparents were crazy religious with him, which is funny because they were never like that with us. My grandparents never pushed me to go to church. And so I only saw the beautiful positive sides of church and religion from my grandparents. I saw them helping people in the community. They would give out food to the homeless. Like my granddad and my grandmother did a lot for the community through religion, but all that my dad received through them was like judgment and like, you're going to hell because you didn't go to church a couple of times a day. And so maybe they just softened up over the years, but it seems like my dad definitely got the very guilt, shame-filled version of religion, sin and hellfire and death and destruction and pain and suffering and all of that. And I think he took that to heart, and I think he always felt full of shame because they tried to put a lot of shame on him and told him that he was going to hell if he didn't go to church twice a day and, all of that kind of stuff. And I can relate that to a lot of my coaching clients. So it's funny. I said, yeah, I have a lot of coaching clients that are religious like that. There's one guy in my coaching group right now who's Muslim and feels a little bit of that pressure. And I've worked with quite a few clients. Actually, there's two guys in the group right now who are Muslim and feel that pressure. There's lots of parents that say you have to get an arranged marriage, with Islam. You have to pray 4 times a day, including at fucking 4 a.m. That seems reasonable. Allah wants me to be tired and grumpy, apparently. That's the best way to carry out Allah's love and, the all-merciful Allah. I do that while I'm tired, do I? No, I think Allah would probably be pretty fucking accepting and understanding if I slept in a little bit so I could carry out his good deeds a little bit better throughout the day, don't you think? But people tend to get very caught up in the religiosity of something rather than worshiping the actual God or the actual philosophies. It's almost like they forget about the God, they forget about Jesus, or they forget about Allah or whatever, and they obsess about the weird little like habits or, almost like superstitions. Allah will be Allah the All-Merciful, which it says at the beginning of every line in the Quran. Allah the All-Merciful won't be merciful if I don't do things exactly the way that some dude in a church or a mosque told me to. Jesus would apparently be really pissed off, even though he talks about unconditional forgiveness, unconditional non-judgmentalism, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. But Jesus would apparently be really pissed off if I don't worship the fucking cross and do that every time I walk into the church. Jesus would be pissed off if I didn't eat fish on a Friday, or if I didn't go to church on a Sunday. No, I don't think Jesus would have given a flying fuck. So anyway, separate discussion there. I could do multiple videos on religion if any of you are interested, but I prefer to talk more about the people themselves, like the Jesuses and the Allahs and the gods and the beautiful messages that are in a lot of religious texts, rather than people who get very full of guilt and shame and fear and hellfire and all of that. Less helpful stuff. So, back on topic. My dad was full of shame and guilt from years of growing up ultra religious and ultra controlling and forceful, which again is the opposite of what Jesus would have wanted. But he carried that around, and that was a big part of why he struggled to open up and why he struggled to let go of his apathy and his shame and his guilt. And it's funny, at one point he said, I said to him, my mother, your wife, and me and my sister, we all love you very much, and we all accept, and there's nothing to forgive. Like, you don't have to feel ashamed. Like, we understood that you were depressed. We understood that you struggled to admit your love for us. We knew you loved us. You made that clear in your own way. You didn't say it verbally, but we knew it. And we loved you back, and there's nothing to forgive. Like, we already forgave you, so to speak. Forgiveness is realizing that there's nothing to forgive in the first place. And so we talked about that, and he said, I really don't feel worthy. I don't feel like I've ever felt like I deserved your love or your mother's love or your sister's love. And it's funny because so many of you can fucking relate to that, can't you? How many times do I say in content, it's okay if you don't feel worthy. It's okay if you don't feel lovable. Write a list about yourself write a list of 50 things about yourself that are lovable or likable. And that's how you start building that self-love and that self-worth. Say to yourself in the mirror every day, I love you. And if that's hard, that's okay. You can practice it. It took me a little bit of practice before I could do that. I've done that every day for the last 2.5 years at this point. There's all these different exercises we can do to bring ourselves some self-love and self-acceptance, but it can be a bit of a challenge, right? And I know that with all of you, that a lot of you struggle with that, and you feel like you're not deserving of going outside and saying hello to a woman and saying, hi, you're pretty, would you like to go on a date with me? You don't feel worthy of doing that. You don't feel like it's okay to bother someone. That's shame speaking. You're too ashamed to go up to someone and give them a compliment and say hi, and that's okay. Or maybe you feel ashamed or not good enough to ask for a promotion at your job. Maybe you don't feel like you're deserving of losing weight. Maybe you feel like you're such a piece of shit that you have to be depressed forever. These feelings of shame and unworthiness can be very strong, and they can get their hooks into us, and that was definitely my father. And so, yeah, he said, I don't really feel like I've ever felt worthy of your love or anyone else's love. And I kind of laughed, and I was like, Dad, we don't give a fuck if you think you're worthy of it. We love you anyway. We don't give a fuck if you think you deserve it. You can't stop us from loving you. We love you anyway. And he kind of paused there and he said, that's really nice. Thank you. And I was like, yeah, it doesn't matter if you think you deserve love. We love you. It doesn't matter if you think you're worthy of this. You're getting it anyway. It's like bad luck. We love you. You can't make us stop loving you. And God knows he tried, and he said that. He said he felt like he'd spent a lot of his life trying to stop us from loving us, trying to put up walls and barriers so that he can't get hurt, so that he can't get rejected. How many of you can relate to that? How many of you build up walls and you decide not to be vulnerable, or you decide not to be honest, or you decide not to really share or tell the truth? You decide not to ask for help. There's one guy in my coaching group right now who's being so fucking unbelievably brave and courageous in practicing asking us for help and asking his friends. I had to coach him through it literally and be like, bro, you're allowed to reach out to a friend and ask them for help, or share your feelings, or say, I'm going through some stuff right now. Do you mind if we talk about it? I did a coaching call, one of those $200 coaching calls that I talk about sometimes, with this guy who, same thing, felt like he couldn't ask for help. He had to be the lone wolf, which is a lot of you, particularly you men. Women are a little bit better at speaking about their feelings, but not everyone. But men, a lot of men really struggle with it. And so this guy had never really asked for any of his friends for help with his dating life. And so while we were on the call, I said, would you like to, and I'm not going to force you to, but would you like to text one of your friends right now and basically say, hey, I'm struggling with my dating life. Do you have any advice? Can we talk about it? And he laughed and he was like, oh, God, I knew this was coming. I knew you were going to make me do something vulnerable or honest because you talk about it in your content. And I was like, I'm not going to make you do anything. You don't have to do this. You're allowed to say no. That's why I said to you, would you like to do this? And he was like, oh, God, oh, fuck, I can't ask for help. Oh, isn't that weak? And I was like, do you want to do it? Do you want to take a leap of faith? You don't have to, but would you like to? And he said, oh, okay, I do. And I said, would you like to do that now? And he's like, well, listen, hey, and the limiting beliefs and the excuses start coming in. And he's like, well, it's 11:50 p.m. at night and he's probably asleep and I wouldn't want to bother him and all of that. And I was like, well, would you like to type out the text and then you can decide if you want to send it or not? And he's like, oh, God, okay, what do I say? And I said, what would you like to say? Which is my favorite saying, right? What do you want to do? What would you like to say? I did a coaching call with some guy yesterday, same shit. He's like, if I'm hitting on a girl, what should I say? And I was like, what would you like to say? And he's like, well, what's the best thing to say? And I was like, what would you like to say? And he's like, I don't know. What would be the best thing to say? And I said, okay, imagine you're 80 years old and you're wise, you've lived the perfect life, you've done everything you wanted, you're super wise, you know all the answers. What would that 80-year-old say to you right now? And then he said, whoa, 80-year-old me would say, it doesn't fucking matter, bro, just say hello. And I was like, there you go. So you had the answer within you all the time, the whole time. You didn't need me. You don't need me for all the answers. None of you need Andy for the answers. I'm just the fucking bald, look at this beautiful bald head. I'm the bald retard on the internet who's just showing you that you have the answers within you. I'm trying to just prompt you and get you to look within yourself. Anyway, so this other guy, the first guy that I'm talking, I know I went off on a side tangent there, which is very rare for me, isn't it? I never go off on side tangents, do I? I never ramble ever. But you guys probably love that by now or you wouldn't be here. But the first guy I'm talking about, the guy who was texting his friend to ask for some help with dating advice. He struggled with it. What do I say? What would you like to say? And then finally he typed it out and he's like, oh God, like, am I going to send this? And I was like, would you like to send this? And so then he goes, yeah, okay. And then he hits send. And they ended up having a conversation the next day or the next couple of days or whatever, talked about it, and it was really good. So that is something that a lot of men and some women struggle with, to open up and ask for help and all of that. And I forgot the original point that I was making. I went on such a tangent here, but I think I was talking about the fact that my father struggled to ask for help. Is that what I was talking about? Who knows? The point is, the point is, my father opened up a lot and was incredibly courageous and was able to ask for that help and show his vulnerable side and all of that. I found that incredibly inspiring and very unexpected. None of this was even remotely on my radar as a possibility. I honestly just expected my dad to die, and that's it. Like, he's just going to die unhappy, full of shame, depressed. Yeah. And the rest of us will love him and be grateful for him, but he'll never really accept that, even though we've told him a lot of times. And he'll never really accept that his children are happy. He'll never really accept that his wife is happy. And he'll definitely never accept that he had some part to play in that, because he feels so much shame that he doesn't think that he was a positive influence on anyone. And so I honestly just thought he would die like that and that he'd never find happiness or share or express happiness with us. And so it was really interesting and unexpected to be a part of this, to see this all happen. And it's funny, he was telling me about a bunch of books that he'd been reading, and he's been reading self-improvement books and like psychology books and stuff like that. So I was like, that's fucking amazing. He was reading a book on depression and how depression convinces you that the future is never going to be better. That the unhappiness that you feel right now is going to last forever, which is not true, but that's what depression tells you. And by the way, on a slight side tangent here, because you guys and girls know I love side tangents, I have a depression article on my website. You can just search for the word depression on killyourinnerloser.com, and you'll find this article. It's also like a YouTube video on my channel, but I have a section here called Hope. And so if you're currently depressed or you're going through depression, like, go to the chapter on hope. And I talk about like how it can be better. I talk about some resources. I talk about like books that have helped me. I talk about a bunch of articles I've written for if you're suicidal or depressed. Like, I literally have one if you're thinking of suicide. I think I have two if you're thinking about suicide. And I have a whole bunch about how to then start taking action to start improving your life. And then, therapy and cognitive behavior therapy. I talk about medication. I talk about making friends. I talk about all this kind of stuff, counseling. I have like a lot of stuff. I even say, you're very welcome to hit me up for coaching if you want. I've worked with quite a few coaching clients, but there's a whole like section there. So go check that out if you're depressed. Again, that's just at killyourinnerloser.com/depression. And I also talk about my own depression, like my whole story, the whole life story of depression and how I overcame it and worked through it and stuff like that. But depression is not something that you're going to overcome by yourself. That's the point. You don't have the energy or the motivation. And so, yeah, he was talking about that, and that he found that in these books that he was reading that said you're not going to overcome depression on your own. It requires a therapist or a self-improvement group, or something like Alcoholics Anonymous is very good at bringing people up, through depression and into love and all of that. Maybe coaching, like, you're very welcome to hit me up for coaching, like I said. Maybe it requires an internet forum with other people who are further along than depression, in their depression. I wouldn't go somewhere where everybody else is depressed, because you'll just pull each other down. Nothing against other depressed people, but they are sure as fuck not going to be the people that lift you out of depression. They're just going to keep you there. I say the same thing, by the way. If any of you are men and you're virgins and you're very insecure about that, do not go and hang out in black pill circles. Do not go and hang out in incel circles, involuntary celibate circles. Do not go and hang out with other people that are down in shame and guilt, because they will fucking pull you down. They don't mean to. They really genuinely don't mean to, but their own unhappiness and depression is like a virus or a cancer that will spread to you. They don't mean to. And again, nothing but love for those people. But what you need is someone who's further along, someone who's already passed the point of courage and has already started taking action to improve themselves, and they will inspire you. You need someone to lift you up. People aren't going to push you up. It's more like someone's already up here and they're like, hey, I'm going to lift you up here. And now you're on my level. But the person who's down the bottom with no motivation or willpower because they're depressed or they're an incel or they're like unhappy, they're not going to have the fucking energy or the experience or the knowledge to push you up. So find someone ahead of you or happier than you or more like who's taken more action than you, something like that. So he was talking about this book that he'd read and how it talked about all of that stuff. And he was starting to understand depression as like this dark cloud that hangs over you and tells you that you don't want to take action and that taking action wouldn't help and that what's the point anyway? It's all nihilistic and you should just sit around and wait to die and self-medicate. That's why he drank so much. That's why he watched so much TV and just would do nothing with his life. And so him reading all of this and going to this silent yoga retreat, and I think letting go of all the regret that he had towards me and my sister and my mother, him letting go of all of that was very freeing for him. And he said, I think I want to start doing some things that I enjoy, like maybe going camping. And I was like, what about your surfboards? And he's like, yeah, I really liked making surfboards, didn't I? And I was like, yeah, you did. Yeah. And they were fucking incredible. They were really good. So you did a fucking incredible, like they worked. They weren't like, they were great surfboards. Like he would surf on them. Other people would surf on them. They're like, this is great. This is like better than if I went to a store and bought it because you customized it. You could make it as thick as I wanted. You could make it as white. Like he would do everything. He'd paint it. He'd put the logo on it. He'd wax it up perfectly. He'd put whatever fin configuration they had. Like he just did everything perfectly. And there's obviously a lot of love put into it. And I think when you buy something handmade that someone put a lot of love into, you appreciate it a lot more than if you just bought it from a factory or something. Like buying the latest fucking phone, there's love that was put into the design of this, but like this doesn't feel, maybe this is a bad example, but this doesn't feel as loving as like a handcrafted cookie from like a home-baked cookie from mum, right? Like cookies have a lot of fucking love in them if they're home, but there you go. That's a better analogy. Going to fucking Krispy Kreme does not feel like there's as much love in that fucking donut. You don't appreciate it as much as like your grandmother bakes you a plate of cookies in milk. You're like, holy fuck, I feel good when I eat these cookies in milk. And the donut is just a donut. It's nice, but it's just sugar and fucking calories. Like it's not anything, there's no love in it. And so anyway, he was talking about doing some things that he loved and that brought him and other people love. And I thought that was absolutely beautiful and magical. I was like, hell yeah, do some of that stuff. And so, again, there's probably more stuff that I'm missing here. This happened like a week or two ago, and I've just taken the time to really think about it before I sat down. I wanted to think about the message that I could maybe get across for all of you. And, I guess the main takeaway that I would say is like, look at the power of courage. He was so unbelievably scared. He told me that many, many, many times afterwards. I sent him a text afterwards. I sent him multiple texts afterwards for the next couple of days, just saying, that was really brave of you. That was incredibly courageous of you. And he was like, that was really hard. Thank you for saying that, Andy, because that was really hard for me. And I was like, I could tell, yeah, you did an amazing job. I told him that like 3 or 4 times. And I told him I was very grateful. I said, that really meant a lot. That was really special. You've just done something really special. Like this 2 weeks away, and then you sharing all these regrets and you opening up and you taking this leap of courage, that was like very special. You've done something very special. And I think that really resonated with him. But I think if any of you are feeling that fear of like, I mean, anything really, like if you're afraid to go outside and talk to a girl, take some fucking inspiration from my dad. If we're talking about a man who's down in shame and guilt and apathy and depression his entire life, this took a lot of fucking balls, for him to do. You can definitely go outside and say hello to a woman, even if you're terrified. You're terrified that she'll reject you or hurt you. He was fucking terrified that I would reject him. He was so unbelievably afraid. He told me that. He was so unbelievably afraid that I would be angry at him, that I would tell him, you were never there for me. It's too late. I'm not interested in having a relationship with you. I don't give a fuck. That ship has sailed. I'm 37 years old now. Go fuck yourself. Like, that's what he thought I would do. Or he was afraid that I would do that. And this took incredible courage. Maybe you're scared to go to the gym. Think of my fucking father, my grumpy, negative, shame-filled, depressed father who fucking launched himself up to courage and took this massive leap of faith. Maybe if you're feeling judgmental, think about the open-mindedness it took from this man who his whole life has said stuff like yoga and retreats is gay, that's for women, that's like female shit, that's feminine shit, like very like alpha male, but really just more like insecure. Most alpha males who go around posturing that they're an alpha male, like that machismo culture, that very macho culture, it's almost always very insecure because the confident male doesn't need to posture. In fact, he's so confident in his masculinity that he spends all of his time looking after, or a lot of his time looking after other people. He doesn't need to denigrate anyone. He tries to lift them up. The person who has abundance and is sitting here at the top with a lot of abundance and happiness and joy and, masculinity, like safe masculinity, they're safe in their own masculinity. They want to grab everyone else and pull them up because it's fucking lonely at the top, baby. And so the alpha male, or the person that you see that's maybe negative to other people or will criticize other people or will judge other people, they're doing that because they sort of feel like they're down here. And if they see anyone else rising up and being happy or showing courage or any of that, they want to pull them down and go, no, fuck no. You need to stay at my level. Otherwise, I feel lonely. Misery loves company. And so he used to be that person. And so maybe if any of you are feeling a little bit judgmental about like maybe someone else or about yourself or about any of this, maybe you have a lot of self-criticism like he does or did, like he did, take a leap of faith, take a page out of this man's book and go, fuck, man, if this guy who's been negative and critical his entire life can go to a yoga retreat, maybe I can forgive this person that I've been holding on to anger towards, or maybe I can be a little bit kinder towards myself. You know what? Andy's always talking about writing 50 things about myself that are likable, and I always thought that was gay, but maybe I can take a leap of faith and do it. Andy's always talking about honesty and taking a leap of faith and being vulnerable with someone and just opening the door to that awesome, connection and communication by just telling them, yo, I'll be real with you, I'm nervous. Or I'll be real with you, I'm looking for a casual relationship and something sexual. Is that what you're looking for? I'll open the door and I'll be honest and vulnerable, and risk that fucking rejection that I'm oh so scared of. Take that leap of faith. If he can, you can. He absolutely can. You absolutely can. And so I might finish up by saying, let's take another look at the map of consciousness. He was down in shame and guilt, right down the bottom, and a little bit of apathy or depression. When he went to this yoga retreat, and definitely when he wrote out all of his regrets and read them out to me in front of me when he was absolutely fucking terrified, where is that on the map of consciousness? That is all the way up at courage. That is such an unbelievable fucking huge leap of consciousness or happiness or joy. That's one of the biggest leaps that I think I've ever seen out of any of my coaching clients, ever. He literally went from shame and apathy. He literally is like me, like the thing that I say at the start of lots of the videos, I went from depressed and suicidal to living a life of abundance and joy. He's not quite at abundance and joy, he's at courage. But I have no doubt that if he keeps going, he can keep climbing up this map. He can keep improving himself. He can lose weight. He can stop drinking, whatever he wants to do. He may do those things. He may not. I have no expectations, only curiosity. But for now, he absolutely went from shame to courage. And if we can live a life of courage, which is honesty and saying what you actually fucking feel, which for a lot of people is absolutely terrifying. For a lot of you, courage is really fucking hard. The courage to tell the fucking truth and stand by it. The courage to have integrity. The courage to say no instead of just being a people pleaser and not wanting to rock the boat and not wanting to have a confrontation. The courage to be upfront about what you want. The courage to say, I don't care if people criticize me for this, or I might care if they criticize me for this. I might get really hurt and really offended and really sad and I might cry, but I'm going to do it anyway because that's courage. That is what courage is. Courage is living a life that is true to yourself. There's a really good book on this, actually. This book here, it's called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. And it's about this woman who did like end of life care for people. And she worked in some nursing homes and stuff like that. And she compiled a book of like, the main regrets that people had. And the absolute number one was, I wish I had lived a life more true to myself instead of the life others wished for me. That's fucking courage. And so this book is like really inspiring to have this book, it would just give you the fucking inspiration and the courage to start doing things that you want to do. Because you're hearing it from people who are at the end of their life and dying and full of regret. And they go, why did I work so hard? Why did I do what other people wanted me to do? Why did I just do whatever my family told me to do? Why did I just do what society told me to do? I wish I'd done what I wanted to do. I wish I'd put myself first. So that's courage. So Yeah, my dad went from shame to courage. How inspiring is that? That's a fucking leap of consciousness. That's a fucking, he's got big brass steel balls to do that because that was very fucking difficult for him. I could see how difficult it was for him. I could see how scary it was. And he did it anyway because that was his integrity. That was what he wanted. He knew that he wouldn't be able to lay on his deathbed and be proud of the life that he had lived if he hadn't had the courage to tell me and my mother and my sister how he really actually felt and what he was going through. And so, yeah, man, I am so, if it's not obvious, I have so much love and admiration for my dad. I'm so unbelievably proud of him for being able to do this. I told him as much. I've told him that 10 times. And I think this was a really, really, really beautiful gift that he gave not only me, but more to the point, himself. He now for the rest of his life gets to know I told my son how I feel. I told him everything of how I feel. And no matter what happens, no one will take that away. I told him how I feel, and he now knows. And I get to go to my deathbed. I get to go to the afterlife or whatever you believe in or don't believe in. I get to go there knowing that I had the courage to say the things that were in my heart instead of hiding them behind fear of rejection or what if it doesn't work out or what if he thinks I'm stupid or gay or whatever, for saying all of this. And so that is courage. That is tremendous courage. And that is what all of you, if you want to, can learn from this story. Take a page out of his book, take a page out of my book, not to blow my own horn, but it's taken a lot of courage for me to get here too. Courage is kind of the beautiful lever or the beautiful catalyst that gets you the life of abundance and joy. Like you can't have a life of abundance and joy if you're not willing to take risks. I'll make that fucking clear. If you're not willing to, you don't have to do anything crazy. It's just the courage to tell the truth, the courage to be honest, the courage to stop manipulating people, the courage to stop hiding behind, walls and defenses and your own fears and your own ego and all of that. It's the courage to tell the truth, the courage to be honest, the courage to be a bit vulnerable, the courage to get rejected, the courage to have your feelings hurt, the courage to have your ego bruised, the courage to feel your emotions instead of hiding them and self-medicating. There's courage to turn towards your fears and your anger and your pain and all of that and embrace it and learn from it because your emotions are trying to tell you something. Don't run away from them. Running away from them just keeps you down the bottom of this map of consciousness down here in the red, running away from your fears and your emotions. But the courage to actually start facing them lifts you up. And then eventually you become a little bit more willing to do that, to be more courageous, to be more honest. It gets easier. Then you reach acceptance. You're like, yeah, I'm just the person that's honest. It's just who I am. I'm the person who, shares their feelings. I'm the person who tells people what they want. I'm the person who says no when he doesn't or she doesn't want to do something. I'm just that person. That's who I've become. You get to that acceptance and then it's easy. Then it's not impossible, but it's much easier to lie. Sorry, it's much harder to lie. Telling the truth becomes easy. Being vulnerable becomes easy. Then you move up into reason, which is like logic and stoicism and all of that. Then you move up into love and eventually unconditional love and joy. You love everyone equally. You stop letting go or you let go of any judgments. You don't think less of people if they're limited right now. Like if they're down in guilt or shame, you don't think less of them. You're just like, that's where they are right now. And I'm going to do my best to try and help them move up the map if I can. Maybe one day you hit peace and maybe one day you hit enlightenment if that's something that you're interested in. If it's not, who gives a shit? You can hang around love. And I'm telling you, as someone who walks around feeling love for probably these days, 95% of my day is just I feel unconditional love towards everyone, towards all life forms, towards all animals, towards all plants, towards all people, towards all of my coaching clients, even towards the people that leave me negative YouTube comments. I have nothing but love in my heart for them. I'll write them nice, long replies saying, hey, brother, I can see that you're hurting right now. Like, here's some love for you. Here's some acceptance for you. I get it. I used to feel the same way you do. I understand why you're telling me that I'm a stupid piece of shit. I used to feel that way too about other people. I understand why you're telling me I should kill myself and delete my YouTube channel. I used to feel that angry too towards other people, so I get it. Like you walk around feeling just love. And it's a really beautiful place to be in. But that takes courage. Took a lot of courage to get here. Took a lot of courage for Mother Teresa to become Mother Teresa, this embodiment of love. Took a lot of courage for Byron Katie to be Byron Katie. It takes a lot of courage for people like David Hawkins and for maybe people that you guys and girls might know a little better, like Jocko Willink or David Goggins. Those people just are the embodiment of courage. And they have these big, beautiful lives because they're courageous, or they were not courageous. They were scared, but they showed a tiny little bit of courage and took a little baby step and said, fuck it, I'm scared, but I'm going to do this anyway. That's courage. And so have the courage to tell the truth, have the courage to take a baby step. If you want more help with that, my coaching is always available. This is like literally what we do with people. I literally have said to so many of my coaching clients, you are here for me to move you up this map of consciousness. If you're down in like fear or something, you're here for me to push you up into courage and maybe some acceptance and maybe a bit of love. Like, you're here for me to push you up. That's what the coaching is for. So that's there. There's a link in the description to that. But ladies and gentlemen, go out there, crush those goals. And if you would like to, practice a little bit of courage, practice some leaps of faith. I promise you that beautiful things happen when you have the courage to tell the truth, to take a leap of faith, to be a little more honest, to face rejection, to face your fears, to face the things that you're ashamed of, like my father did here. Look at all the beauty that comes from this. My father and I now get to have a relationship for the rest of our lives because he had courage.